Hello, world. This is James Young presenting the podcast of Chats with Baba. My topic is going to be talking about children from 0 to 5 and the importance of what goes on during the formative years as it relates to children's overall development in life. So this podcast is going to be brought to you probably on a weekly basis. And I'm inviting you to join me on Chats with Baba. Today, I'm going to be talking about the impact of this pandemic and how it's affecting children's development and learning. I want to stay within the context of it's almost a lost year of schooling. It's almost a lost year, and I want you to process that. Children naturally learn by engaging with the teacher and other children. Yet some of them being at home did not have the resources to do what is possible to trying to keep up. So one of the purposes of this podcast is to try to help parents to fill in the gaps of what has been lost during this year while children are basically at home. It's natural for children to gravitate to each other when they're in the classroom. They just do it naturally. You don't have to tell them that's what children do. So being at home, they may not have all of the necessary resources to do the things that will help them over this period. So this podcast, I would hope I want to invite parents on a journey with me to try to fill in those things that will enable them to work closely with their children. I think it's important for parents to understand that children have natural genius. It's there. And what the effort of this podcast is to help you to unfold that natural genius. For example, a few years ago, the American Academy of Pediatrics was talking about one of the things that they've noticed in this generation is that children are not playing. And I said, hallelujah. I wrote an editorial response to it by saying that I'm glad to know outside of early childhood people, others understand the importance of play in children's development. Children are like engineers when it comes to play. Engineers solve problems, and in children's play, that's all they do is to try to figure out how things work, what makes them work, why they work. So this podcast will be an effort to address those kinds of problems, if you will. And so I will come to you with that kind of information. It's not telling you how to raise your children. I think that's a source of parents, but there are some universals for all children. I want to get at some of those as we move through this podcast. So today, this is the first podcast on Chats with Baba, and I just want to point out a few things relative to the work that I've done over the years, which I think would be helpful. For example, in this particular book, From Roots to Wings, Successful Parenting African American Style, I wrote this because of a late scholar, Amos Wilson, in his book entitled Awaken the Natural Genius in Black Children. What he's saying is that genius is there in our children. How do you awaken it? And he was saying that we basically don't have information or don't know what children do at various stages of development. So as a professor of early childhood, I thought I had an obligation, a moral obligation, to assist parents to understand how to unlock that natural genius. So in the book From Roots to Wings, it's not a cookbook, it's not a recipe, but what it does present is a profile. And that profile talks about the characteristics of children who have demonstrated intellectual and cultural genius. And so in the book, it talks about what that profile looks like, if you will. For example, at the top of the profile, it says confidence building. Okay, confidence. Children that are bright, intellectually and culturally, they have a good sense of who they are. So when I say that, when you're dealing with young children, parents, you want to affirm them every opportunity that you can. Give them affirmation of what they're doing makes sense. You don't have to worry about whether it's right or wrong. I mean, that will unfold and take care of itself. Another characteristic or attribute of kids that are bright, they ask a lot of questions. Children ask more questions than we can answer. For an example, my neighbor saw me doing this demonstration with children, and the children said, "Can you put toothpaste back in the tube?" I said, "Well, let's try it." That was a question. Can you put the toothpaste back into the tube? And obviously, no, you can't. Once it's out, it's out. But that's a question of curiosity. And that's a part of that natural genius. They just have questions that come into their mind. The other piece that I want to mention as we're talking about this, that it's important to understand that 85% of the brain is developed by the time the children are 5. Consider that, 85%. They haven't learned calculus. They haven't learned trigonometry. They haven't learned chemical formulas, but 85% of that brain that will get to those things has been developed by age of 5. So I want to just stay with the whole issue of the attributes. Confidence. Mama, what about this? Mama, what about that? And they're asking you questions. There are 2 things that I think it's important, because children have no understanding of time. The questions that they ask just go on. But with young children, you want to demonstrate 2 things. You want to be patient with them, and you want to spend time with them. Those are probably the 2 most important attributes that you can do with young children, because as I said, their mind is constantly running. It's constantly working. The other piece is, another attribute is curiosity. Okay? They're always examining things, and they want to know why this does what it does. The issue around curiosity is safety. You want to make sure that what they're doing, they don't endanger themselves. So that's why it's important that you have patience to observe them. The other piece is that children who are bright know how to start a task and finish a task. It's one of the attributes. How do you undo this? Where do you start with it? How do you move it along? How do you bring it to a close? So that just shows you that all things have a beginning, a middle, and a closing. And those are concepts that as they're doing things, you want to engage with them. It's just consistent with this natural genius that's unfolding before your very eyes. So this podcast is to be one that engages you, because it's a chat. It's a chat. And that's what I'll be doing. Chatting about the development of what goes on naturally with children from the time that they're born until the age of 5. And what you're doing is laying out the foundation that's going to enable them to not only be successful in school, but those same attributes carry them through life. So it's a foundation where children's genius is unfolding. And it's also important to affirm them. It's also important to have them feel good about themselves relative to their skin color, the texture of their hair. All of these things feed into that first attribute, that is self-confidence. So I've chatted with you about a few of the attributes of children. I'd say kids, children who do well, and at the top of that list is confidence. The second attribute in this list, and they're not necessarily in a chronological order. The second attribute is a good thinker, and they're studious. Mm-hmm. And a good thinker is a child who's always coming to you with questions. And when they come to you, let me go back to one of the attributes I talked about, patience. You have to just take time with them. Now, if that's not an appropriate time, share with them a time that we can come back to the various questions that they have And whatever time you've set aside, come back to that time so that you can answer the question. Another attribute is expressive. They have good language skills and they're expressive. They are always coming to you with stuff, and some of the stuff may not make sense to you, but they're very expressive. Another attribute is that they're leaders. And if you look at children that have leadership skills, they are always wanting to be in charge and taking control. So I don't want to over sell these things today, if you will. I think they're important attributes. But as we get into other podcasts, I will continue talking about them. These are all in a book that I wrote, From Roots to Wings, Successful Parenting African American Style. Does this mean that it's only good for Black children? No. It's good for all children. My attention is to focus on children who have been underserved by both schools and other societal groups. As a result of that book, I put together another book. It's called A Parent's Guide for Academic and Cultural Excellence. That's connecting the home, school, and community resources. But these will be things that we will talk about in weeks to come. Both of these books are available on Amazon.com, or you can go to my website, drjamesyoung.com, and the books that I've written are there. So for today, I hope I wanted to share with you some of the attributes as they relate to children's natural genius. And as we continue to awaken that genius, that's what the focus of this podcast will be about. Thank you, and I look forward to talking to you again. Have a good evening.